Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arno, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Dave. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be here.
Which is very timely in terms of your use of the word happy.
Yeah.
Because today we're going to be talking about happiness.
How happy have you been over the past week?
Good question. Just like everyone else's week, there were ups and downs. And so I'm happy to be here doing this podcast. It's definitely something I was looking forward to all week. So right now I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling happy, but even in my answer there, right? Excited. Is that a form of happiness? Is it a different kind of happiness? So, and I'm sure if I were to ask you the same question, Dave, how happy were you this week? I'd probably get a different answer.
For sure. But happiness is one of those things that if you ask them, would you like to be happier? It's like, of course, right? Like, sure. But what is that and how do we do that? I think we can have a great discussion today about that.
Even going back to grad school, thinking about those very first clients who we saw, from that point in time till now, clients will enter our offices and just ask, how can I be happier? Or I'm unhappy. How can I change that? And it's such a loaded question in terms of, okay, well, what does happiness mean to you? And everybody has a different definition.
Yeah, the flip side to that coin, a lot of clients will come in and say, I want to be less depressed, right? Like I'm feeling really down. I don't want to feel down. But is happiness, the absence of negative emotions, the absence of depression? It actually isn't, right?
Or is happiness this euphoric high that we're seeking all the time, right? And is that even feasible or practical, right?
Yeah.
So I'll ask clients, why do we have all these other emotions then, right? If all we're striving is for happiness, then why have our brains given us all these other emotions to process?
And I really like that there's a whole science to this. There's tons of researchers around the world that are looking at this and trying to measure it, but also define it. So I can't wait to dive into some of this stuff. You could pick up on my energy. I think, the energy about talking about happiness is quite different than the energy about talking about grief and loss and depression.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because even when we do see people who are struggling with grief and loss, they might say, well, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. I just want to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how do we take that direction towards this idea of happiness and away from something that might be hurtful?
Yeah. And should we be telling people when they're down to be happy? I've heard this so many times where someone is upset about something and someone else is telling them, just be happy. Sure, that's a nice idea, but
and if it worked that easily, I don't think our profession would exist. Right. Just the other day, I had a parent talking to a teenager and saying, because the discussion was about, yeah, this teenager is feeling sad. And the parent was just going, well, what do you have to be sad about? You have everything in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe not the best time to say this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, sometimes it just reflects the discomfort we have with negative emotions. And it would be nice if everyone was just happy all the time. I'm even on thinking about family vacations at times, and I'm like, can't we all just be happy, right? We're on this vacation, we're in this nice place. Let's all be happy. And then it's like, that doesn't work, right? Like you can't just command people to be happy. So
and I hope that as people are listening to this, they can also feel that we are also humans, the two of us. And there are times when yeah, we do want to also strive for this idea of happiness. But I think being in this profession, when I hear somebody tell me I want to be happy all the time, my question to help them reflect about that is that even possible to feel happiness all the time? Because even if you feel happy all the time, that then becomes your baseline. Is that even happiness anymore?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by happiness. So let's unpack this a little bit because there's a lot of really smart people trying to figure this out, and they've come up with some ideas around breaking up happiness into different categories, I guess. So the first one that a lot of people think about is like, yeah, the big smile on your face, it feels good. You feel pleasure. So eating something you really enjoy, whether it's ice cream or chocolate or, pick your poison. So that pleasure, what we know about that pleasure is that it's like you're saying, it's quite fleeting. So the first bite of that chocolate is the best. And then after that, it starts to go down to a point where it might not even be enjoyable anymore. So we have pleasure, the first one, which is, I think, what most people think about when they think about happiness. But what the research and the people studying this have found is that striving or just trying to pursue pleasure or that hedonia or hedonistic happiness, that is not the recipe for a good life, right? And so when we're looking at a good life, which researchers have overlapped with the general feeling of happiness, you get down to meaningfulness, purpose, engagement. And if we want to look at sustaining happiness or having more long-term happiness, we got to look beyond the pleasure.
As you were speaking about that hedonistic pleasure, the thought that came to mind is this idea of external validation or even consumerism. Even when I talk to, starting with some of my teenagers who I work with into my adults, it's the idea of, if I can have more of this, if I can have more of that, my life would be better. The thing that you got 3 weeks ago, how much do you look at it now? Does that thing still bring pleasure? Do you still look at it and does it bring a feeling of happiness or euphoria? Most people would say, well, I wouldn't call it euphoria or happiness anymore, but I'm glad I have it. But I think that's where the pursuit becomes a problematic because you're constantly seeking external validation. And when it's not there, then you're all of a sudden feeling unhappy. And so then you think to yourself, I now have to go get more.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the science around this is that it debunks a lot of these myths, a lot of these assumptions that people have. And so one of the main researchers and authors in this area, Sonia Lubomirsky, she basically breaks up the myths into two categories. And the first one is I will be happy when, and you can fill in the blank. I have more money. I have a great job. I'm in a loving relationship. There's all these ideas that we have about what will make us happier. And then the other category is I won't be happy or I can't be happy if I don't have money. I'm not in a relationship. And if we can look at like, okay, well, what does the research show us about this? Then we can go, maybe we're not going to put all our effort in this area that is maybe going to have some benefit for happiness like short term, like it's going to give us a bump. Amazon and
Mhm.
credit cards have tapped into this idea that, like you're saying, consumerism, that if we just had this we would be happier, and that is like a myth that keeps getting perpetuated and people benefit from it, like there's profit from it. But telling people that you will feel good for maybe a minute, maybe a day, maybe a week. After that, it's not going to feel good anymore. And so is it worth spending all that money on that thing?
And I think that that also speaks to how intelligent marketers are, right? Advertisers. Even social media nowadays, right? Like people primarily post things to, for lack of better words, sort of show off, and it plays on people's self-confidence. It sort of causes people to question, am I on the right path here? If I'm not living in that particular way, or if I don't have that thing, does that mean I'm less of a person? Am I content with myself? Can I feel at peace? Can I feel relaxed with what I have and what I'm doing? Or should I be self-conscious because this is what I'm seeing on social media and this is what I'm seeing in advertisements?
For sure. I think we as as a human species, we're hardwired to compare. And with social media, that is on our news feed or scrolling, right? And if we are comparing ourselves to people that look happier or look better or like it can crush our own sense of well-being and happiness. And understanding that that's actually kind of toxic, that actually is not helpful, can help us. Like, I've recently put a timer on my Facebook, that after 15 minutes it tells me your time is up. Do you want to continue? And then oftentimes I'm like, no, I want to do something else more productive that'll actually have a meaningful impact on my well-being than comparing myself to people that I don't really know and feeling often worse about myself because of what I'm seeing. And again, that's just the way our brain is wired, but we can control how much we expose ourselves to that, and how we talk to ourselves after seeing some of this, right? And go like, oh yeah, of course we feel bad.
I'm not against the idea of purchasing things that bring you a sense of joy in that moment. I think, great, you know what? If you want something, you have the means to do it, go for it. But I think it's also very important to be able to foster a sense of self-confidence, which then in turn, I think helps people just be at ease with who they are rather than constantly pursuing this idea of happiness. Because if someone can tell me that, you know what, I'm feeling good about myself today, I wouldn't necessarily call that person is happy, but if happiness comes, they can feel it, but they're also comfortable going back down to a baseline of just being at peace and feeling relaxed.
For sure. As you're talking, there's two paths that I kind of want to go on. So I'll go the first one because we've already kind of been mentioning it, but the hedonic adaptation is what they call it, like where we actually, buying that thing that's going to make you happy. But with looking at some of the science behind that, actually the best way to do that is to rent it, right? And just have it for a bit and then return it and then maybe rent it again. So if you're thinking about like a vehicle that you really want, right? And you think, I'll be happy when I have that. For me, growing up, it was the Porsche 911. I had the remote control and I just grew up thinking like, I would love to be able to drive one of those cars. And now with like knowing about this science, I'm like, I'm not going to spend my money buying one of those cars. Maybe one day I'm going to rent it and drive it for the weekend and like love it. And then I'm going to return it and I'll get that bump. And then I haven't spent all that money on something that I thought would give me long-term happiness or long-term pleasure. And then the second path, you're talking about that, inner contentment or kind of how people are feeling. And there's research that shows that we all kind of have like a set point, that there's a genetic component to how happy we feel. And so like height and all these other kind of genetic traits, depending what we do, will affect kind of how tall we get, right? If we eat the right food so with this, it's like you might be born lucky and you just are generally happier than the person next to you, right?
Yeah.
And so that percentage that we attribute to how much of our happiness is attributed to genetics has evolved a little bit with the science. Initially, there was this pie chart
Yeah.
that came out and everyone loved it. It was showing like 50% of your happiness was attributed to your genetics. Now they're saying it's actually closer to 70 to 80%. So don't beat yourself up if you're doing a lot of the right things and not feeling that much happier. You might have a lower set point.
It's a personality predisposition, right? Anyone listening who may have kids, you can think about even within your own children. Sometimes we'll say, oh, that particular child is so much more like this caregiver, and this other child is so much more like that caregiver. And that already shows, that there's genetic predisposition to our personality. And even with how someone may look in terms of that predisposition, it's like, well, that person is so much more outgoing, and they talk to everybody and they smile to everybody, so it may seem or appear like they're happier. But also, again, it doesn't necessarily speak to how someone may be feeling on the inside. And just because if someone is introverted, does that make them less happy? It doesn't, right? It's really the presentation is very different from how one may feel on the inside.
This just showed up as you were talking about that. And I'm watching you kind of smile and talk, and I'm going, oh, when we get together and we're trying to take pictures, right? What do we tell people to do? Smile. Like we're teaching kids from such a young age that if I'm going to capture this moment of you, I want you to be happy. And how much of that, yeah, that we'll like post pictures of ourselves looking really happy. Are we happy all the time? Absolutely not. But that's what we want to like project or, show to the world.
Yep. And it's so funny. Maybe we should all start practicing this a little bit more. I was just looking back at some photos last night, and there's a photo of the other three family members of mine, so my wife and my two kids, on the Toronto subway on the TTC, and two of them are smiling. And then you have my youngest, my son, who's got this grumpiest look on his face. And when I look back and I asked my wife, I was like, what's happening here? What was being captured in that moment in time? And I often remind people that this idea of happiness is a snapshot in time. Just like that photo I looked at yesterday. It doesn't mean that the state of happiness or unhappiness is going to be there forever, that it's going to be there for an infinite amount of time. It's not. From 1 minute to the next, you can have all sorts of different emotions, all sorts of different feelings. For me, it's almost like the foundation of where you are, that's your baseline. And then when the moment comes that brings a burst of joy, a burst of happiness, a burst of excitement, feel it, be there, right? Be in that moment, enjoy it, but also be mindful that this is not going to last forever. It may last for a few minutes, it may last for an hour, it may last for a couple of days. Let's say you get accepted, you're applying to universities and colleges, you get accepted to where you want to go. Amazing. That joy and excitement may last a good week. But don't forget, life is still there. Everything else, your responsibilities, family, all of that, the rest of your school, high school career, it's still in front of you, right? So you still have responsibilities. So after that week, that joy may come back down. And are you comfortable coming down?
Yeah, I think that baseline, right? That's that kind of genetic component or leans on that a bit. It's this idea that we kind of have this baseline and we can bump up or bump down. And we know that a lot of the pleasure things will be a quick spike up and a quick kind of descent back to that baseline. So what can we do to change that baseline? Right. And that's where some of the research has been kind of neat is that, initially that pie chart had like 40% of our activities or what we do influences our happiness. And now they've shrunk that to like about 10 to 15%. So not a huge component, but still an important piece of like, we have control over this. We can actually do something about it. And so some of the research around what are the long lasting or the longer lasting impacts, there's actually a course in the UK that you can take, and they've been studying the students have been doing these interventions or these activities and finding out which ones have that impact and which ones last longer. But before I even go into some of those interventions, I just want to say that even those long-lasting interventions, unless you keep working at it, your baseline is going back, right? It's almost like going to the gym and you put in all this effort and you make some progress and then you stop going to the gym, you go back. If you're going to be working on your happiness, it's not about just like a quick fix. It's something that's going to be an ongoing work, but it can make a difference.
Yep. Yep. You just had me worried there because it's been a couple of months since I've been to the gym. So
Oh man, I just started riding my bike to work again for the first time, and it's just like, wow, how hard it is to get back on the bike, literally.
but I think it speaks to though, like even that hard work, like you getting back on the bike, I'm sure there's a sense of satisfaction out of that, right? Again, I think that's another derivative of happiness, right? Is like, yeah, you get off your bike, you've just ridden it, for let's say, I don't know, 40 minutes, you get to work, you get off your bike, you're on time, and it's like, oh, I did something different today. I did something that's bringing some sense of satisfaction. Might not be euphoric joy, but it's like, something that's above your baseline.
Well, and exercise is one of the things that is, actually improves our mood and has longer lasting impacts. And it's also one of the things that's pretty hard, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
adjusting and working it into your lifestyle and getting getting to the gym or just
Yep.
getting the gear you need to ride your bike in the winter. It's not easy, but knowing that it's going to have some payoff, it's actually going to benefit you. That's where I can make better decisions.
Yep. And that's where we call it behavior activation, right? Like getting outside, doing something to get your body moving. And I think the myth of exercise, when people hear exercise, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to sweat. I need to, do this hard thing that I'm not used to. I always tell people, you know what? Exercise is relative. Even if you go outside for a walk, if you have been holed up in your house, in your apartment for a few months and you've rarely gone out, even if you intentionally go out for 10 minutes, go for a walk around the block. Even if we start with that, I'll take it. It doesn't have to be strenuous. It doesn't have to be, riding a bike or rock climbing or whatever. Get some fresh air, get that body moving just a little bit. And, I see a lot of people who will say, it's hard. It is hard, right? But I also try to instill the sense that we can do hard things. We can do hard things in order to bring a sense of satisfaction, to bring a sense of achievement, which again is related to satisfaction and happiness. Right? Now, does it happen right away just because you've gone out for 10 minutes in one time? No, it has to be sustained. And that to me, I think working with many clients is the hardest part, is that we're often looking for quick things to bring happiness, going back to the hedonistic pleasure. But this is something that takes time, it takes practice.
Oh yeah, I think, again, going back to how the brain's wired, we are hardwired to avoid pain and to pursue pleasure, right? So actually getting on my bike, that's a hard thing to do. It hurts. And I know that it's going to be better for me in the long run. It's not automatic. So that delayed kind of gratification, that's hard for us. We weren't supposed to live this long, I think, with the brains that we have, right? We were designed to
Yep.
just not get eaten and, find your next meal and hopefully you can procreate and pass on and the species could continue. But now we're not there, right? We're quite comfortable. And actually we know that people that aren't challenged are actually less happy, right?
Yep.
So finding ways to challenge yourself and not be too comfortable is going to be one of the things that could be helpful to you.
And I think when you say, to be challenged, again, it's all relative, right? We're not saying that everybody has to, I don't know, find the challenge of starting a new company and that's where you're going to find joy and satisfaction. No, it's all relative. Again, if it's going out for a 10-minute walk and that's that purpose and that brings a sense of satisfaction and joy, great, right? It's all relative to what we're looking for within ourselves.
Yeah, you know what? I was dropping my little guys off this morning, and I dropped the older one off, and then I go to the little one, and he always wants me to watch him leave, and I'm like, "Love you, have a great day," and he's like, "Have a great day," and then we do our regular like hug and kiss, and then he's like, "Make good choices," and I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, make good choices." I'm like, "You are." 5, you're telling me to make good choices. But I think it relates to what you're saying in terms of like what can we do, right? And so there are a lot of things out of our control and that we can't control the weather. We can't control like a lot of things. So not that, unhappy people, it's all their fault, or happy people, it's all, we don't want to go there, but we just want to say like, you can do something about it, right? And you can make small changes. And some of the research, again, with what can we do about it, Martin Seligman wrote a book a long time ago, Authentic Happiness. So if you're more interested in kind of diving into this, Lubin Mirsky and the Myths of Happiness is
Yep.
a great resource. But Martin Seligman, and he actually summarizes some of the research in terms of these things that we can do. So I'll rattle these off, and then I'm curious what your thoughts are. One of them is designing a beautiful day. So you pick, how you want to design your own beautiful day, and then you actually do it. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier that you didn't really name as savoring, but that
Mhm.
savoring the moment, being mindful in that moment can help us kind of extend the benefits of these things. He talks about a gratitude visit. Essentially, it's thinking about someone that has positively affected you in your life, writing a letter about it, writing a testimonial, and then meeting up with that person and sharing it with them. And, like that, it can be such a powerful experience, right? For both sides. And it has that long lasting impact. And then a strength state, finding out what your strengths are, what your partner's strengths are, or other people that you have a relationship with, their strengths, and you combine that into like a date, a day, or an evening, And that has a huge bump and that tends to last. And then philanthropy or being kind, volunteering, doing something nice for someone else really has that impact. And a lot of times that's free, right? Like these
Yeah.
things don't cost a lot of money and they tend to have a huge impact on our well-being or our sense of happiness.
So I'll put a caveat to a number of these things. I think the ones you just rattled off, I think perhaps for a large part of the population, yes. So this is where I'll counter just a little bit, and I think for the sake of, the diversity of listeners that are with us, I would say that, for some of the population, some of these things can be quite difficult. And again, this is where I would place the caveat, visit a professional, find out what your strengths are, find out how to use gratitude. And then I've also come across because our clinic works with a lot of the population that's neurodiverse. Right? So when we talk about like a gratitude visit, I can guarantee you there's a handful of my clients who will say, I don't want to visit anyone. I'm happy by myself. I can just do stuff by myself. It's like, okay, right? So if that brings you a sense of happiness, great, right? But do we still see some sort of benefit to having even a small social network? Right. And sometimes that's where our conversation will go. Do you enjoy being with your one or two friends? Right. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, I do. Or sometimes they'll say, it doesn't really matter. As the research has sort of shown sort of these umbrella considerations and factors towards happiness, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to work for everybody. Right. So if someone is part of the neurodiverse population and they're listening, like, oh, you know what, volunteer or like visit a friend, once a week, they might be like, ugh, I don't want to do that. Right.
Well, even with that, like I appreciate that. And I think I can't wait to, release some of these podcasts because we're going to get this feedback from people. And just like you did, it's like, well, does that work for everyone? And it's like, no, it doesn't. Right. And a lot of the research, these are general trends that
Right.
may or may not. So, take away from this what you want. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. Right. But some of this is like, try it as an experiment. Go do something that you not sure will help and then check out whether it helps. And then if it doesn't, you kind of create your own roadmap with a lot of this stuff. And the reason I think it's important to talk about this is because there's again a lot of people researching this, a lot of people looking at it, and sometimes learning new ideas allows us to do things differently. And I know personally, I've really made different choices, right? I don't know if they're
Yeah.
always better, but I've made different choices with this information. And one of the big ones, a personal one, is I found a letter that I wrote, I think in grade 7 or something, that said basically I was going to make as much money as I could, as fast as I could, and then I would be happy and I wouldn't work anymore. And yeah, that didn't happen at all, right? But now looking at this, I'm going, if you make more money than above the poverty line, give yourself a little bit more above the poverty line. After that, the amount of money you make after does not actually contribute to that baseline happiness. So just kind of reevaluating how much your time you're spending at work versus spending time with your family and how much that's actually going to improve your life. I found that super valuable.
I remember going through my internship slash residency, and I was working in a palliative care ward at a hospital. And my supervisor and I were having a discussion about working with this population. And, when you speak with those who are in palliative care, never do they ever talk about, wanting to have had more work hours, right? When they talk about what is it that you wish you did more of, what may have brought a bit more joy to your life, for the most part, it's about spending time with the people they love or doing the activity that they really enjoyed that probably had nothing to do with work, right? So going back to that idea of really savoring the moments that we have, it's so important being able to say, wow, this is really nice right now to do this with my friend or to do this with my family member and just being in that moment and enjoying it.
For sure. Yeah. And I want to also kind of scan some of the myths that, like, what are the things that we think will make us happy that actually don't, right? Do you have any, like, off the top of your head that you're like, at one point in life you thought this was gonna be the recipe for happiness, and then later learned either through research or just experience that that wasn't the case?
Yeah, the other day I was thinking, what was I like in my 20s? Even my undergrad years, there was sort of this ideal self or purpose, like, I'm going to do good in the world. I'm going to make changes. And, at the time, it was like, okay, did money matter? When I look back now, I'm not sure if it did in a way, but I think as I've grown, the pragmatic side of me sort of kicks in. I still want to help people. I'm thinking now, like maybe in my late 20s, but I also eventually want a family and I need to support that family. Right. So that idealism of like, oh, I'm gonna go into the world, like saving the world, right? The pragmatic side of me starts to come out. Is that feasible? Can I still have a family and do all that? I don't know. Probably not. Right. And so it's like shifting and that idea of happiness changes. So I think for me, it has changed over time as I've aged. Does that make me any less satisfied with where I am now because I wasn't able to do that? No. Right. I can categorically say no because, life has changed, priorities have shifted. And I think so far I've been able to balance those priorities. I hope.
Yeah, I think we adapt. We adapt to our environment, and kind of a general rule is that things that we think are going to make us happy don't really make us that happy, and things that we think are going to make us miserable don't actually make us that miserable. So just knowing that, there's a bit of research that like older people are generally happier, and it's like, and they might have more physical ailments and other like challenges, right? But that I think as we live, as we continue to move on, we figure out ways that maybe it wasn't how we thought it was going to turn out, but we can feel pretty good about these situations. And then yeah.
In terms of, what can bring happiness, a sense of purpose as well. I think that's an important one in terms of what the research has shown. Having a sense of purpose, I think even for a lot of burgeoning teenagers, starting to find their identity, who they are, what they want to do, and then going into young adulthood. This is what I actually see quite a bit in my own practice, working with some older teenagers and young adults, feeling stuck, right? Not knowing really what direction they're going in. What are they doing in school? Am I in the right program? And to me, that's like a big sense of purpose, and for everybody, that sense of purpose is different. Even with some of the adult population, those who may be retired, I work with a handful of individuals who are retired right now, and that shift of working, seeing coworkers, socializing, having a purpose day in, day out, reaching objectives and goals as they retire, going back to our episode about grief and loss, like there's that grief and loss, and then also searching for a purpose. Those who present as sort of lost or not really having an anchor, typically they'll say, you know what, I don't find myself as happy. I should be, right? That idea of should. I
Mhm.
should be happy because I'm retired, I've done well, I'm fortunate enough to be retired, but I don't feel that way. Okay,
Mhm.
so this idea of purpose, like what do we do now?
Absolutely. I think, I've been talking a lot personally, but clinically in the office, I see a lot of this, right? Like it's the kind of that existential crisis of
Yep.
like, what's the point to life? What's the point of my life? And if you don't have an answer for that, it's really hard to be happy, right? You might have that pleasure, happiness, but really that deeper level of contentment, of peace. So seeking that out and going, and that can be kind of mysterious. And then there's a lot of like, popular sayings about, finding your passion but how can we help people do that? At least the way that I have found to do that is looking at like, what are your strengths, right?
Yep.
What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? Let's start there. Not everyone is going to, find purpose based on their strengths because some people actually don't enjoy the things they're good at, right? But let's look at those strengths and let's look at how you might be able to engage or have that kind of meaningful engagement or meaningful contribution to
Yeah.
the world, to society, to your family, to yourself. That's the way that I've been able to kind of apply some of the science on happiness.
And I think people will have multiple purposes too. So, even as we talk about, what are you good at? How do we apply it? Also, don't forget, like, sometimes just being a good friend. Being a good friend and checking in on a friend every couple of weeks just to say, how's it going? For those of us who do value socializing with others and see that as an important factor in our livelihoods, that can be a sense of purpose too. Going out for a coffee or a meal with a friend every couple of weeks just to continue connecting and forming that bond. That can be a sense of purpose. So I think that's actually in the research has shown that, socializing, again, for those who enjoy socializing, who don't see it as a huge chore, it's a very big protective factor for happiness. When you're with somebody, when you're chatting with them, connecting with them, it brings a sense of satisfaction and joy.
For sure. And again, not for everyone, but the research is super clear. It's been replicated and there's been longitudinal studies. You know, good relationships, the good quality relationships make us happier and healthier, right? There's a strong correlation for that. And the opposite, right? Loneliness makes us unhappy and sick. But again, if you're not lonely, right, then you're probably going to be okay, right? Like really check in with yourself. But if you're thinking like, am I going to stay home and watch Netflix tonight or am I going to, call a friend and see if I can meet up? You might want to call the friend, right? Knowing this and start to kind of cultivate or work those relationships.
And I often advise clients to, like, they'll say, well, I should call a friend. Yeah, the right answer is calling a friend. And I will say, no, no, it's not the right answer. It's like, what do you feel like doing tonight? If calling a friend tonight seems like a chore and it's going to suck the energy out of you, but as you think about Netflix or, watching a movie, whatever, and you're like, oh, that actually feels quite nice. Like, that might be pretty satisfying tonight. Then go with watching a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're exhausted and you need to recover and rest, and that's kind of what's needed. But I also, maybe I'll counter that a little bit just because going to the gym might not feel like you want to do that, right? Like some of these things don't feel like the thing that you want to do, but knowing that you're gonna feel better the next day or you're gonna once you're actually doing it, once you're meeting with that friend, you're like, "Oh, yes, I need to do more of this," right? But when you're sitting on the couch and you got the blankets pulled up and you're very comfortable, it's like, oh, that can feel like a huge mountain to climb to do that thing that we know is better, but we'll probably say maybe we'll do it tomorrow.
I'm laughing because I feel like you're trying to give me some kind of subliminal message here to get back to the gym.
Hey, take it for what you want it. I'm not telling you what to do. A lot of this, again, kind of comes down to what's worked for me and kind of sharing that. And then, also pulling in the research because we don't want to just apply our own, what's worked for us to the world because that's not what a psychologist does, right? Like a
Hmm.
psychologist doesn't say, well, I did this and it worked for me, so you should do it. It's like, no, no, no. Let's actually look at broader than that and see kind of what has helped other people. So,
And I think to that point is, not forgetting that just like so many things, this takes work, especially when somebody has the predisposition, perhaps to see things in a more pessimistic view or in a more negative mind frame. It takes work and it takes time to practice and to shift away from that negative mind frame. It takes conscious effort. I think it was just yesterday I was working with a teenager and we decided that after school every day, we're gonna write down 3 to 4 points for things that you were appreciative from the day. Not necessarily things that brought you happiness, but things that you can appreciate, things that you can be grateful for. Because it's so easy for us to scan our day and just sort of pick apart what didn't go well, what went wrong. But in order to shift that mind frame, it's really taking a conscious and mindful approach to sitting down for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and just coming up with 3 to 4 points that we are grateful for. And some days, as I tell everybody, It might be like finding a needle in the haystack. You may have to search a little bit longer than other days, but it's sometimes it's like finding that silver lining to say, you know what? I guess that could be seen as a thing that I can be grateful for.
Absolutely. I think I'm glad you brought that up. Like we have a negativity bias, right? And our brain is designed to prioritize danger and negativity. So some of the kind of ballpark like estimates is that our brain weighs negative events 5 times more than positive events. So, it's going to take some work. And especially if you have negative things happening in your life and there are stressors going on, it's it's not ignoring those things, but it's recognizing that there's also other stuff there. Like the silver lining, it's actually there. You're not making it up. You're not pretending it's there. It's actually there. You're just not focused on it right now. And
Yep.
sometimes it's that my body can move, and I can get to one place to the next by walking. That's pretty cool. Like just kind of breaking it down and being able to see what's actually there.
I was asked a really good question too. Should I write these things down or can I just think about it? And I will ask people to write it down, whether it's on your phone or on your computer or a blank piece of paper, because the act of having to write something down, it slows down your thoughts right away. The act of writing cannot move as fast as your thoughts. You can have hundreds of thoughts in a minute, but you have to slow down your brain in order to write these things down. And so, again, that brings the intention that, okay, I'm consciously thinking about it right now as I have to write it down. And then also, what I find as a neat exercise is that let's say you do this every day for even a month. You can look back now at things from a month ago to see, oh, yeah, that particular day, yeah, I was very grateful for that. I'd forgotten, but I'm glad I have this on record that, oh, yeah, that was a really nice gesture by somebody, or this happened and I was able to reframe it in a more positive way, so I can do a lot of this.
For sure. Yeah, I think, and again, some of this might come easier to some people than other people, right? Just
Yep.
depending on your predisposition. I know for myself, one of the key experiences was in my training and watching a video. And essentially, it was like finding what's right in the world. And it was a National Geographic photographer that had been taking a lot of pictures of the terrible things that were going on around the world. And then decided to finally like change his lens and change his focus to find one right thing in the setting that he was at, and whether it was one flower growing through the rubble. And so now when I'm in situations, I'm like, oh man, the world seems terrible on so many levels. And then it's like, well, what's right in the world? What's, finding that right part of it that's there that I probably am overlooking is an exercise that I think has been super valuable.
Are some days harder than others to do that, though, for you?
Yeah, if you don't sleep, if you don't eat, if you're stressed about something else. I was kind of laughing because I was like, absolutely with my kids, right? Like, so that's one area too where I'm trying to like go, what's right with this little person, right? I don't want to. It's easy to pick out like they don't do this and don't do that and stop doing this and following them around the house and kind of. I again working with kids, there's a phrase like catch them doing good, right?
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
look for them doing something good and walk up to them and tell them about, you notice they're doing something good. That was not the approach to parenting that I was familiar with, right?
Yeah. No, parenting's changed a lot. And we're going to save this for another episode for sure in terms of parenting and catching them do good. That'll be an interesting one, I think. So I guess, Dave, for you, having gone through this conversation today, what is your takeaway?
Oh, yeah, I feel like I'm only halfway through all the stuff that we could talk about. So I don't, maybe the main takeaway, and I've probably said this already a couple of times, but your happiness isn't totally all within your control, but you do have some control, and being mindful and informed in terms of what you're actually doing to work on being happier or less depressed or just your general well-being. There's tons of resources out there in terms of concrete things that you can do to help yourself. So yeah, I wish you the best.
And as for me, I would say my takeaway is being able to see things in the moment, whether it's happiness or things that might bring a bit of angst or worry. A lot of it is momentary, but being in that moment to say, you know what? Yeah, this is going well. This is nice. With the realization that, okay, this will fade too. And you know what? There's going to be a burst of another moment. That this idea of sustained happiness is not feasible, but I can take joy in the events that occur within my day, within my week, and just enjoy that. And then, at times then we can smile to ourselves, even if it is to ourselves. Don't have to share it with anyone else. It's just within us. It's in our control to smile and to enjoy that time, enjoy that moment, and then we keep moving forward.
I love that. I love that. There's some research around just smiling and what that actually does. And it might just open up those files in your brain that have like happiness or gratitude connected to them. So sometimes, yeah, just start with a smile.
Amazing. Like you said, we could go on and on about this topic, but we won't. We'll save that for some future episodes. In the meantime, take good care, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.